Everyone, members of the committee and members of the media who are present in the room, and all my colleagues, Madame Minister from the Minister of Canadian Heritage, thank you for being here. We have a very packed program today. First, we have the Honourable Minister with us today. Thank you very much for being here. We've been expecting you for quite some time, and then we're going to suspend after an hour, and we're going to start again 5 or 10 minutes later with the nominee for the position of Commissioner of Official Languages, Mr. Theberge, who will end his meeting here, and then there'll probably be a vote at the end of the committee to confirm his nomination. So, Madam Minister, the floor is yours. However, first I just want to say that pursuant to 32.5, Annual Report on Official Languages 2015 referred to the committee on Wednesday, August 16th, 2017. We have before us the Honourable Minister Joly, Minister of Canadian Heritage, as well as the witnesses from Canadian Heritage, Mr. Hubert Lucier, Assistant Deputy Minister, Citizenship, Heritage and Regions, and Jean-Pierre C. Gauthier, Director General, Official Languages Branch, Citizenship, Heritage and Regions. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to appear before this committee once again. As the chair said, I'm accompanied by Hubert Lucier, Assistant Deputy Minister for Citizenship, Heritage and Regions, and Jean-Pierre Gauthier, Director General of Official Languages. First, I'd like to thank this committee for its work on issues that are important to Canadians and our government. You've invited me here today to talk about the Annual Report on Official Languages 2015-2016.
Canadian Heritage achievements through its official language support programs. As you know, Canadian Heritage administers 2 major official languages support programs. One is designed to support the development of official languages community and minority communities. Among other things, this program helps us support the provinces and territories providing government services to official language minority communities in areas such as education, culture, justice, and health. The other focuses on promoting the use of English and French in Canadian society.
This report includes the efforts made by 72 federal institutions to support the development of official language minority communities and promote both languages in Canadian society. It also evaluates the 3rd year of implementation of the Roadmap for Official Languages in Canada, which expires on March 31st, 2018. At the time the report was submitted, 96% of expenses forecast for 2015-16 had been dispersed. The next annual report on official languages for 2016-17 is in production. It will include all the work accomplished during the consultations held in 2016. For me, this work is crucial. It is the first step towards developing a new action plan for official languages. I'll say more about the action plan in a moment, but I'd first like to take a few minutes to talk about the latest Statistics Canada data on official languages.
Show an up-to-date portrait of our 2 official languages. It is clear that they remain an important tool for unity and inclusion in an increasingly diversified society. Even so, we can do better. We must continue our efforts. The data highlighted how it is important for a government to continue to promote official languages and official language minority communities. Regardons de plus près ce qui se passe dans les communautés.
Let's have a look what's happening in these communities. The absolute number of Francophones living in French-speaking minority communities has increased. Francophone communities are growing, especially rapidly in 3 territories. What this means is that there are more and more Canadians whose mother tongue is French and are living in minority communities. Canadians who contribute daily to our country's development, diversity, and excellence. However, Overall, the relative proportion of Francophones is declining. It has dwindled from 4% in 2011 to 3.8% in 2016. In light of this, the government's support is crucial.
As you know, never before has Canada had so many bilingual citizens, 6.2 million people. But the situation varies widely from region to region. Francophones are highly bilingual, at 89% outside Quebec and at 41.5% within Quebec. Anglophones in Quebec are also highly bilingual, at 66%. However, only 6.6% of Anglophones outside Quebec are bilingual. There is potential for major progress here. Immersion classes are gaining in popularity across the country, and Canadians have frequently told us how attached they are to their two official languages.
Our government has taken note of these data and intends to fulfill its official languages obligations. In fact, we've already taken action on several files. I'm thinking, for example, of the new functional bilingualism as a criterion for consideration when appointing judges to the Supreme Court, creating the new multilateral early learning and child care framework, announcing that our government will review the official languages regulations, reinstating and modernizing the court challenges program, establishing the Mobility Francophone component of the International Mobility Program, and expanding the Express Entry System, and providing funding through Budget 2017 that included additional funding of $2.24 million for Young Canada Works in both official languages program, $80 million over 10 years for the construction of a community educational infrastructure in official language minority communities, and $7.5 million per year ongoing to improve parliamentary translation services, which are fundamental to our work, and $2 million over 2 years to improve the ability of federal courts to make decisions available in English and French, among others. The current roadmap will end on March 31st, 2018. We'll be ready to continue the initiative with a new action plan. I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to make an important point. The investments linked to the roadmaps are now permanent. That means that the projects presented in the roadmap will extend beyond March 31st, 2018. The new action plan, which will be in place on April 1st, 2018, will build on the investments made over the last 15 years. I look forward to announcing that once the plan is ready. However, in the meantime, I can assure you that we're working very hard to meet Canadians' expectations. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd now be happy to answer your questions. Thank you, Madam Minister. Without any further ado, we'll start with our round of questions, and the first person is Mr. Genereux. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us today, Madam Minister. I'll ask you later questions about the roadmap going forward. But first, I'd like to take advantage of your presence here to ask you questions about the process that led to the nomination of Mr. Théberge. There was a fiasco last spring. And the fact that Mr. Théberge is now here because the process was done very poorly last spring. What changed in the process in relation to what the process was last year? We're very proud of the process for nomination of this position, which is very rigorous and transparent. We've never seen such a process for the nomination of an official languages commissioner. You're talking about the process last spring or for Mr. Théberge? No, I'm talking in general about our process. In July, I had the opportunity to consult the various candidates and to opposition members, rather, and to send a letter to them. And I received response to these letters. And then I had the opportunity to speak with two spokespersons with the NDP and the Conservatives. And we're very happy to have a solid candidate, namely Mr. Théberge. As you know, we really want this agent of Parliament to be independent and to understand the importance of official languages. Mr. Téberge told the Senate in his testimony that he was aware of the process that left the departure of Ms. Mayer, and this happened in June, and then he applied in July, and when he applied in the transparent method that you mentioned, there was a firm, a headhunter, that contacted him. Why would you give a contract to a headhunting firm for such a rigorous, transparent process that you've mentioned? Why is there a need there when this person applied, he gave his name? We're very proud of our process. If you look overall for the nomination process in the government, there were thousands of Canadians who applied, and several also applied to become this agent of Parliament. And I'm happy to see that Mr. Téberge was unanimously supported by the Senate some time ago. And I'm convinced that he'll be an excellent watchdog for protecting and promoting linguistic rights in our country. On Tuesday, Mr. Téberge, unfortunately, we had to shorten our time from 2 hours to 1 hour. He spoke about various questions that were asked, and one of them was with regard to bilingualism of Supreme Court judges. We'll have an opportunity later to have him clarify his position on this. But what do you think about what he said with regard to Supreme Court justices? Obviously, Mr. Téberge is independent. He's a nominee for a position of Agent of Parliament, which is at arm's length from the government. But the government's position is always been clear on bilingualism. I'm surprised you're asking me the question. Whereas the previous government, Conservatives, named several justices who were not bilingual to the Supreme Court. Either they didn't speak French or English, depending on the case. We've appointed 2 judges to the Supreme Court. The most recent one was able to answer our questions from the Justice Committee, both in English and French. So we're very proud to support bilingualism at the Supreme Court, and we will continue to do so. Do I still have time left? Earlier, you answered a question from the NDP in the House, and I want to bring it up because it's important. The NDP seem to be wrapped up in the question of their new leader. There seems to be a contradiction, if I've understood correctly, based on what people were saying to you about the NDP. Do you agree with this? And why did you vote against the bill put forward by Mr. Choquette? It's up to the NDP to answer questions about their position on bilingualism of Supreme Court judges in terms of appointing judges to the Supreme Court who are bilingual, either in both English and French. We have a clear position. As a government, we've appointed 2 bilingual Supreme Court judges, and we're going to continue to appoint judges to the Supreme Court who are bilingual. And we're ready to examine the process to make sure that the appointment process does ensure bilingualism. Your government has committed to tabling a bill on this. Our government is always ready to do more to protect and promote official languages. Nova Scotia. Mr. Sampson. Thank you, Madam Minister, colleagues. I've known my colleagues for quite some time, and I appreciate seeing you here, Mr. Gauthier and Mr. Lussier. I'd like to go back to a few points that you made. It's very important. You talked about the success of your government, and yes, there have been many successes, no doubt, but I wanted to underscore 2 of them, and perhaps you could give us some information on them. Historically, we've never had an agreement between the federal government and education at the provincial level with school boards. So this was a major change. Now, the priorities are very clear, and it will ensure, to some point, good negotiations. Also, in terms of daycares, under your leadership and that of Mr. Duclos, now we have articles targeting francophones outside of Quebec and anglophones inside Quebec. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about how this could help official language minority communities. Thank you for your question. I know you are a keen defender of minority rights, particularly in Nova Scotia. And I know that this is a subject very close to your heart. It is also a subject very important to us. Throughout the country, we heard that there is the school boards, French school boards, have the desire to have greater transparency and accountability in terms of their negotiations and the roadmap. So what we decided is to take account of the requests from the school board and to include them in our negotiations with the provinces and territories. We want to make sure that when it is time for federal investment in education, the school boards will then be able to really benefit from this and be transparent and accountable. In terms of early childhood education, as you know, we're the first government that's invested so much in early childhood education, and this is the subject we heard throughout the country when we did official languages consultations. We know how important early childhood is, so we really have to invest in this and to develop a new action plan for official languages to make sure our communities can benefit from our investments. These two changes will change the world almost, both in education and in official language minority communities. I'd like to thank you so much for that. Another important question is that you had a chance to meet many community groups in Nova Scotia a few months ago. And after your meeting, the other side said the minister has not shared a relevant vision to ensure vitality. Can you tell us about your trip to Nova Scotia and how it was to meet these groups? Yes, I had the chance to meet several organizations from Acadia in Nova Scotia. They were all there. I went to Francophone school in Dartmouth, and you were there as well as the local MP. We had really good discussions, and what I told them is that during the exhaustive consultations we conducted throughout the country, we identified key subjects for our communities, namely the importance of immigration, of early childhood, of support to media and radio stations in minority languages. There's the whole question of operating budgets and their increase for community groups. So these are subjects that we are going to discuss and cover in our official languages plan, and these are subjects that are very important and fundamental to the future of our communities to ensure their vitality.
All right, a last question. I have many, but here's an important one. There's a lot of work that's been done over the past 2 years within the government, but also at our committee. The reports we've presented have been really detailed. They've looked at essential aspects for advancing this extremely important duality. The Official Languages Act has existed for a long time. Are we coming to a point where we need to be vigilant and we need to look at this act to improve it? Where are we in that reflection? Because it's very important. And it goes well with the vision that you shared with us. Thank you, Mr. Sanson. Naturally, I appreciate the reports you've produced. I respect the work you do. And we're all allies around the table for official languages. It's true that the Official Languages Act turned 15 turns 50 in 2019, and we've already announced that we'd be modernizing the regulations for the application of the Official Languages Act. But we're ready to look at how we can modernize the system, how we can modernize our approach. So whenever you prepare recommendations, we study them. I know the Senate is also looking at how to modernize the Official Languages Act itself. They'll be preparing a report in 2019. So I follow what's being done very closely, because naturally the evolution of the Official Languages Act must follow Canadian society. Thank you. Mr. Mulcair, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, yesterday you said that in the case of Netflix, you presented a cultural proposal and not a taxation proposal. Do you understand that the problem is that there's a lack of tax fairness in what you've proposed for the cultural sector, and that there's a whole range of stakeholders in Quebec who are asking you to change course because it's your responsibility? You can't pin that on other cabinet colleagues. It's your responsibility. Our government has always been clear. What we presented with Creative Canada is a cultural policy, not a tax policy. Regarding the Netflix agreement itself, I didn't negotiate any exemptions for sales tax, and it's a $500 million investment for original French and English language content produced in Canada, with a $25 million agreement to ensure that our French language producers can get their share of that $500 million. Netflix won't be able to benefit from new tax credits. They won't have access to the Canada Media Fund. Mr. Chair, may I finish? Minister, our time is limited, and you've already given your answer. Mr. Chair, please conclude quickly because Mr. Mulcair wants to continue. Quebecers and Canadians know we're investing $2.3 billion in culture, the biggest investment in 30 years in arts and culture. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know what the minister likes to say, but our time is very limited. I will continue asking my questions. Before yesterday, we found out that someone was being proposed as Official Languages Commissioner who doesn't understand that it's necessary to ensure that French language complainants are able to proceed in French at the Supreme Court. We're very concerned by that. On October 25th, the minister before us, who's talking about the importance of official languages, voted against a bill that would ensure that going forward, any new Supreme Court justice knows both official languages. Earlier, in answering a question from the official opposition, the minister didn't answer the question, so I'm going to ask it again. If they're serious about having both official languages at the Supreme Court to ensure equality at the Supreme Court, when will there be a government bill if the minister doesn't like the bill that she voted against on October 25th? Mr. Mulcair, have you said that to your new leader? Excuse me, Mr. Chair? Please answer the question. It's a good question because I want to ensure that my colleague here, it's a legitimate question that was asked, Minister. My question is also legitimate. The interpreter can only interpret one person at a time.
PD dorénavant concernant le bilinguisme à la Cour suprême.
You are before the Official Languages Committee. It is not for you to ask questions to members. Please answer the questions. It'll be my pleasure. Our position regarding the Supreme Court and bilingualism is clear. I understand that the NDP's position on bilingualism at the Supreme Court has been disavowed by their leader. I hope the NDP will readjust and be able to say the same thing in Quebec as outside Quebec. Mr. Chair, there's something that's clear. On October 25th, the minister before us and the Prime Minister, who also claims to be in favor of bilingualism at the Supreme Court, voted against a bill that would ensure that going forward, all Supreme Court justices are bilingual. You can turn that around however you like, but the minister is not answering the question. She's saying she voted against the bill because she had something better to propose. Okay, when will she propose it? When will we be seeing it? This is their third year in power. We haven't had the least bit of an indication as to what they're going to be. They're in their third year. It's painful, but it's true. It's their third year. When will we be seeing a bill to ensure that Supreme Court justices are bilingual? It makes no sense that a lawyer named Dupont has to speak English at the Supreme Court. We want that to change, and we haven't changed our position on that. Two things are clear. The NDP has disavowed its position on Supreme Court bilingualism, and then we've appointed 2 bilingual judges to the Supreme Court, and we will continue to do so. When will we be seeing that bill? Why won't you answer such a simple question? Mr. Mulcair, you're not answering either on Supreme Court bilingualism. What I'm saying is that Supreme Court bilingualism is essential to our government. We agree on the outcome, just on the end, not on the means. For the means, we want to ensure we find a way that will ultimately ensure, in 30 seconds, Mr. Mulcair, that any future government no longer have the floor, Minister. Please respect the chair. I'd like to talk about exempt staff now. Political staff. Have they been used in selecting the person you've put forward, the person as an opposition party we've never been consulted on, the appointment of Mr. Théberge? Did Ms. Caroline Séguin, a staff member in your office, was she involved in selecting Mr. Théberge? Did staff contact people and validate information, Caroline Théberge or other exempt staff? We're very proud of our appointment process for the Supreme Court and also for the Official Languages Commissioner. We've received hundreds of applications. When I sent the letter to Mr. Mulcair to find out, very quickly please, to find out his comments on the process, they said 3 things: that they wanted to be consulted, which we did, that we consult the FCFA and QCGN, which we also did. False, says Mr. Mulcair. And third, that we have someone from Acadie, and we did find someone from the University of Moncton. So I think we were able to meet their request. Thank you, Minister. Ms. Lapointe, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking the chair today, once again. Welcome, Minister. Welcome, Mr. Lucier. Welcome, Mr. Gauthier.
Recently, the Quebec government appointed a new minister responsible of the relation with the English-speaking Quebecers. Did you have the chance of meeting with Mrs. Kathleen Veil?
I had the chance to discuss with the new minister, Mrs. Veil. We agreed on the importance of supporting English-speaking Quebecers, especially the ones that live in different regions of the Quebec province. And therefore, in the context of our new action plan, we will make sure that we provide the right support to these English-speaking minorities. And it's always a pleasure to be able to get the input on the part of QCGN, which is a very important organization in order to support the vitality of the English community, English-speaking community in Quebec.
I'm sure you're aware that an English-speaking person in Montreal, if they are in a rural thing, we went to the Eastern Township in this spring, no, this September, and they don't have the same issues as the Montreal. Are you aware of that? To help these people outside Montreal to get their community with the vitality?
Of course, we've heard that loud and clear, that there was a willingness on the part of the communities to be able to, of course, be better supported by the federal government in the context of its new action plan, since a lot of these smaller communities are living in very remote places. I had the chance also in Île-de-la-Madeleine to meet with some of these communities and to hear their struggles. And of course, I bear that in mind while preparing the new action plan that will be put in place for April 1st of 2018.
Merci. Dans un autre ordre d'idée, tantôt vous avez donné des
Thank you. On another topic, earlier you provided statistics on bilingualism. For Anglophones in Quebec who are very bilingual at 66%, as well as Francophones outside Quebec who are bilingual at a rate of 89%. Linguistic minorities, in all of the studies we've seen, it's clear that they are very bilingual where there's a majority, and it's a strength to have more and more bilingual citizens. We've heard people who are looking for bilingual employees, people like Air Canada. I think we need to increase the rate of bilingualism, both for Francophones in Quebec and Francophones outside Quebec. In the act you'll be modernizing, will that be something that will be considered? I think it's very important that we increase the rate of bilingualism. Your question is a good one. For our new action plan for official languages, we always ensure to support official language minority communities, those who very sincerely are facing many challenges. But to have social cohesion throughout the country, we want to support bilingualism, develop bilingualism among Canadians. That's essential. The action plan seeks to address those two priorities. We heard a number of suggestions for solutions, and I'm sure you've read our report, but it's clear when we talk about immersion at school, in elementary school, that's something that's desired. Outside Quebec, it's really Anglophones who want their children to have access to that. I'd like to hear your comment on that. It's a good point. As I mentioned in my speech at the beginning, more than ever, there's an appetite from parents outside Quebec to send their children to immersion schools, French immersion. That's good news. What we also see is that Alberta, for instance, has its first policy to support services in French for French-speaking minority communities. And I met with my provincial and territorial counterparts over the past few months. Education ministers are looking to offer immersion courses and French immersion schools. That being said, we need to ensure that when investments are made, when provinces and territories wish to invest in things, that it not be at the detriment of official language minority communities, French-speaking communities that have their own school systems that are facing major challenges in terms of recruitment. To buttress the impacts of living within an Anglophone majority. You were talking about recruitment. That's an important issue. There's a lack of teachers, French-speaking teachers outside Quebec. Have you spoken with different education ministers? Because graduates, teachers in or outside Quebec, could there not be talks held in order to ensure we can have enough teachers for both official languages throughout the country? It's a topic that's been much discussed with different ministers of the Francophonie, and it's close to the heart of Jean-Marc Fournier, my Quebec counterpart. Inaudible comment. So we're working on that issue as part of the action plan for official languages. There's a lack of French language teachers throughout the country. For French language school boards and for school boards that offer immersion programs as well. So we're really looking at that closely. Mobility for teachers throughout the country. Mr. Vandal. Good afternoon, Minister. First of all, I'd like to thank you once again for having visited Winnipeg, as well as my community, Saint-Boniface, Saint-Vital. People were very glad to see you. Entrepreneurs, small business men and women, they were very pleased to meet with you. I was very pleased to meet with them, dear colleague. As you may know, the community I represent, Saint-Boniface, is concerned about significant changes in French language education. The provincial government, the Conservative government, which is led by a former Reform Party MP, has eliminated an ADM position for French language education, Le Boeuf, which is very important. I know it's a provincial matter, and I know you can't talk at length about this issue, but I wanted to highlight it. My community, Saint Boniface Saint Vital, and I think a number of official language minority communities are looking to us as a government, as you as a minister, to show leadership. Leadership that was lacking for 10 years from Stephen Harper's government. Would you like to make some observations? Thank you for raising the matter. It's very concerning. Over the next few days, I'll be sending a letter to my counterpart, Rochelle Squires, to raise the matter. As part of our negotiations with the provinces to support official language minority communities, French-speaking communities in Manitoba in this case, for our investments in education, we want to raise that issue. I hope you'll continue to raise that issue in Manitoba itself. It's important to always protect and promote language rights, and language communities need allies throughout the country. Whenever there's a setback for official languages, we have to call them out. We have to focus on that. Thank you. We'll continue to work with the community on this matter. My second question is that the FCFA, I think last week, published a report indicating that only 25% of funds from the roadmap are going to institutions and organizations in minority contexts, and 60% are going to the provincial and territorial governments. I know you weren't minister when the roadmap was announced, but would you or Mr. Lucier or Mr. Gauthier be able to talk about this? Is it true? Is that accurate to say? What can we do to ensure that more funds go to communities? First, I heard communities talk about this throughout the country. Their operating budgets were frozen during 10 years. That's very concerning to communities. We want to look into that issue. Funding to support, to promote, and defend language rights was frozen or decreased, and that's of great concern to us as well. So we came in and we modernized the Court Challenges program, but that's also why we're looking at how we can ensure that we reinstitute capacity in the country to support and defend language rights. I think throughout the country, our organizations need to continue to mobilize and to support efforts to defend the vitality of official language minority communities. For our action plan, I talked about it earlier. We talked about the basis of it. We'll have the same investments as the roadmap that ends on March 31st, and we'll add new investments. We'll have a governance plan to ensure that the money is properly distributed and that there's accountability within government.
With a governance plan, there'll be more control over the funds when it goes to provinces. But is it true that within the former plan, or the current one, the provinces take 60% of these funds? There's money that is transferred for education. So we obviously work with the provinces and territories on this. But there's also a lot of money that is transmitted to the organizations directly. And with our new action plan, we want to focus greater on the by and for in terms of the services offered to communities. Thank you. 10 seconds. So, Ms. Cusi, you're going to start, and you're going to share your time with Mr. Mulcair. Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister. It's always a pleasure to see you. I remember for my whole life, the first day that we met each other, I was charmed by you, so it's really nice to see you. My first question. Oh, yes, your French is very good. Yes, I'm very proud to speak both official languages, even though I make many mistakes. No, you're doing a good job. I read that we've spent $77,000 to find Ms. Mayor as a candidate. Did the government spend the same amount for Mr. Theberge, even though he applied himself for the position? We have several candidates throughout the country who applied, and we're very happy that the process went very well. We found an excellent candidate. This candidate, for the first time, doesn't come from Ontario or Quebec. He is a Franco-Manitoban. He also has worked in Acadia. So we're very pleased and convinced that we're going to have a true watchdog for official languages. Of course, I really love people from Manitoba. My husband's from Winnipeg, and he can speak French as well. So I'm very proud of that as well. In terms of the situation with the Supreme Court, Mr. Theberge said, we agree on the principles but not on the means. You said that there would be value in having a bill in imposing bilingualism at the Supreme Court. Is that what do you think? Mr. Theberge could answer your question on that. Our government has a clear position on this. We support the importance of bilingualism at the Supreme Court. The Prime Minister has said this in an op-ed, an editorial, and a letter he wrote, and he published it in all major newspapers. The Justice Minister has taken her mandate very seriously, and will appoint two very good judges to the Supreme Court, and they're both bilingual, and we're going to continue to do so. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to share my time with Mr. Mulcair. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to go back about a statement that the Minister made earlier. It is not true to say that the QCGN, the Quebec Community Groups Network, was not consulted. I checked just before. I spoke with the members. The interpreter is not. We can't interpret if everyone's talking at once. I like to explain that based on the law, and we live in a state of law, with regard to the law, recognized parties must be consulted. It is a very simple issue. Does the minister believe that consulting someone mean that we just tell them who the government has already chosen? That's not consultation. That's information. The law requires consultation. We're very happy to have been worked so well with so many organizations, whether it's the QCFA that I've met several times, or the QCGN. I've spoken to them several times as well. And my parliamentary secretary had a chance to discuss things with various stakeholders in the area. When I sent you a letter, Mr. Mulcair, I received a response. And there were 3 conditions in the letter that you clearly outlined, namely the importance of having consulted organizations and party leaders from the opposition, and also to nominate someone from Acadia. The official opposition said it was satisfied with the process, and we aren't. So we're happy with the process and the candidate. We are saying that there was no real consultation. This is false. Informing someone about the candidate that you've chosen is not consultation. This is obvious. But I'll drop that for now. Now, I wanted to go back to the minister said earlier. You referred to a document. There's a parliamentary tradition that dates back hundreds of years by which a minister that refers to a document should make it available. Earlier, you mentioned a document that there was a Netflix agreement. Phones outside of Quebec would love to know what's in this agreement. So, based on this tradition of tabling these documents, when will we see this agreement with Netflix? I clearly referred to the letter I wrote to you, and I'd be happy to table it. You referred to a Netflix agreement, so you shouldn't forget this. It'll appear in the official transcription of our meeting today. You specifically referred to an agreement with Netflix. We want to see it. The agreement with Netflix was done under the Investment Act in Canada, and it is confidential. Before it didn't exist, and now you're saying it's confidential. I do have the letter. Mr. Lefebvre, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being with us today, Minister. You mentioned several things, and I have two questions for you. You've just said that the financing for the roadmap will go beyond March 31st. So why is it important for communities? There's some anxiety that we've noted in some organizations with regard to federal funding for official languages. So I want to make sure that they understand that we're aware of the situation, and we're going to invest even more in official languages. And there was very little investment done under the former Conservative government. We want to modernize our approach, bearing in mind that there are concerns related to immigration. We have to integrate new Francophone immigration in minority language communities. This is a complex issue, and we don't always have all the tools to find ways to integrate these new people in these communities. And another point in terms of early education, how can we make sure that a child can start their education and their learning and rapidly learn in a minority language? So assimilation can happen in linguistic communities. These are some examples, but they're part of the new reality today, the new reality of these communities. And these are sizable challenges that these linguistic communities are facing. Thank you very much for talking about that today. You also have a list of investments that you've mentioned and concrete action that has been taken over the past 2 years. On page 4 of your opening remarks, you said that you've just given some examples, and there's things you haven't mentioned. So there's been sizable investment in cultural investments that were in Sudbury and Northern Ontario. We know that there are community spaces that are vital for minority communities. So I want to hear what you have to say about this investment that was done for cultural spaces throughout the country to support these communities, as they're very important. It's a pleasure to be here to say that there's more than $12 million being invested in Sudbury. Hundreds of people were there for the announcement, and it was really good news. And the Francophone community there had been waiting for it for years. We also have done investment in cultural spaces for linguistic communities, for example, in Aberdeen and Moncton, which is a fundamental center for the Francophone community there, and the Seguin community, and Abuktush in New Brunswick. We've also invested in Shitkamp in Nova Scotia. In this region of Nova Scotia, in Cape Breton, there is a wonderful linguistic community of Acadian Francophones. So here's our 4 examples of projects that we're supporting. Thank you. That's just been over the past 2 years. Bravo. So I wanted to give my time to my colleague, Mr. Arsenault. So we'll go back to Acadia. 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I begin, Minister, the QCGN has just tweeted that they were consulted in the nomination process for the Official Languages Commissioner, despite what my colleague is suggesting. So after the holidays, we are going to conduct a study on early childhood throughout the country, and we're going to travel to Western Canada as part of our committee. I would like to know, during your consultations, what do you think we can do to improve the conditions of minority communities for official languages? As I said earlier, we have good allies around the table, whether it's the Conservatives, the NDP, or the Liberals for official languages. All of your reports, we're studying them. The one you've just done on Air Canada, for example, we're going to come back with you with a response and some government action. Quite frankly, your work helps me in terms of horizontal leadership. As Minister of Canadian Heritage, I'm always working with my colleagues, and sometimes I push them a bit to make sure we are doing important investment in official languages. So regardless of the topic, whether it's immigration, early childhood, or even looking at the reality of community organizations throughout the country, I support them wholeheartedly, and it's important to study the situation, so I'm quite happy to read your work. At the end of the day, as we approach the 50th anniversary of the OLA, now we're at the 2nd or 3rd generation of children that's stemming from this act. So I've seen that there is an ongoing tradition, but it's a fragile one. So I've also met a lot of young people. Thank you, Minister. Now we're going to Mr. Généreux for 6 minutes. I'd like to go back to the question of Netflix. It's something that concerns me a bit. You said earlier there'd be 25 million for Francophone content. 5% of the 500 million? 500 million for content in French and English and original Canadian content. There's an additional 25 million to develop the market for Francophone producers to have greater access to the $500 million in investment. I'm convinced that we've got some wonderful artists, Denis Villeneuve, Xavier Dolan, among others. We have some of the best in the world. That wasn't my question. I'm convinced that Francophones, my question, I'm not asking you to name artists here. What percentage of Francophones in Canada will be affected? The Netflix investment is not perfect. Oh, no? The government has had the courage to tackle difficult questions. You're the Minister of Canadian Heritage, and he's asking about the percentage of Francophones in the country. I've been asking the same question since earlier. Percentage of Francophones in the country, there are 8 million Francophones in the country. 8 million. Roughly 22-23%. Go ahead, Mr. Généreux. How can it be that in the agreement that you've made with Netflix, there isn't 22% French content in that, rather than 5%? As I said, the agreements with Netflix is not perfect. What we did do, in terms of supporting French production. We've invested millions in media funds, and the Canadian Media Fund is the fund that supports production throughout the country. And do you know how much of this goes to French production? 30% for the 22 or 23% of francophones in the country. So that is why we were very aware of the importance of French content, and we've invested in the Media Fund, knowing that there are many distributors in the country, which diminishes their content and revenues. So we've met the concerns of the Francophone media, and we've invested. What American company do you expect to sign your next agreement with for Francophone continent? That's a relevant question. What we've decided to do, what we've had the courage to do as a government, is to modernize our Radio Broadcasting Act, and there's nothing in this act right now or in the legislation that allows us to tackle the challenge of digital platforms. So we're going to modernize legislation, and I hope we're going to work together to protect our culture and our Francophone culture online. What American company do you plan to sign your next agreement with? What we're focusing on is modernizing legislation. I'm going to work with my colleague, Mr. Baines, to modernize legislation on telecommunications, and I'll ask also the CRTC to study how we can ensure production, creation, and distribution of content. You're negotiating with other U.S. companies for agreements? It's not part of our priorities right now. Our priority right now is to make sure that we're going to modernize our legislation, and I hope I'll be able to work on this modernization with the sector. I want to update our Telecoms and Broadcasting Act, but also want to modernize our Copyright Acts as well. There's been a lot of frustration in the artistic community, so I think we need more fairness to our artists. What do you think, Minister, about the statements? Well, you've named many artists, but there are many artists who signed who do not agree with the agreement you've reached with Netflix. These people represent the industry, and they say they're very concerned, even greatly concerned by this agreement. And if there are other agreements that are going to be signed, it could mean the end of French content. Do you know what the artists in the cultural sector remember? They remember the conservative cutbacks. They remember the cutbacks to CBC. So $2.3 million. We're very proud of the investments we're making. We invested $175 million in CBC. You speak too much, Minister. I'm asking you a question. You've been in power for 2 years, and you've opened up the floodgates. But how come, if you've opened up the floodgates and you're giving money to all these people, how come these people are pissed off at you? 5 seconds. We've invested $2.3 billion. We're very proud of what we've done. Okay, over. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the Nomination and Selection Committee for the Official Languages Commissioner, there was a representative from the Privy Council and Justice Canada, Treasury Board, and the PMO. But there was one person who represented the minister and her department, but there was also someone from the minister's cabinet who represented the minister on this selection committee. We're very satisfied with the process for nomination of this candidate. I hope you'll have the chance to ask him all the questions you wish, because I hope his answers will be clearer than those of the minister. I'm asking you a simple question. I just want to finish what I'm saying. End quickly, please, and he'll be able to ask his question. In the letter that I sent you in July, I described the selection process.
I've set out these different stages, and if you'd like, I can send the letter again. What I'm asking the minister is to say who it was who represented her politically within the selection committee. She understands the question. It's a legitimate question. Can she tell us who represented her politically? At all times, we ensured to have a good process. We ensured that everybody in place for the selection committee were not in a position of a conflict of interest, and we're pleased to have an excellent candidate who will be a great agent of Parliament. Could the minister now tell us whether or not she'll be tabling the Netflix agreement? As I've already answered the question, Mr. Chair, the investment was made under the Canada Investment Act. How can we know that? And it's a confidential agreement. Finally, Mr. Chair, since the minister has not answered this either, point of order. We've gone over our time. We have a few minutes here. We began at 3:30. I want to ensure he's not taking my time. Bill C-203 was before the Senate, and it was an act to amend the Supreme Court official languages. It was before the House of Commons, and it wanted to ensure that all Supreme Court justices would understand both languages. There's never been a unilingual francophone at the Supreme Court. We're trying to avoid unilingual anglophones. The minister voted against it. She said earlier that it was because she had a better idea, a better bill. When will we be seeing it? It's their third year in power. Mr. Mulcair, what I've understood is that if your leader had been in the House to vote on that bill, he would have voted against. I know the minister voted against it. The minister voted against Supreme Court bilingualism. Thank you, Minister, for having come today. Thank you for having answered our questions. We will now suspend for a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, to welcome our next witness.
Bonjour à tous. Nous allons.
Hello, everyone. We'll resume. We have Mr. Théberge before us, the nominee for the position of Commissioner of Official Languages. Once again, we apologize for what happened last time, Mr. Théberge. We'd had a request from the Bloc Québécois to ask questions last time. They're not here today, so that'll save time for everyone. It's Thursday, yes. We'll continue. We'll begin with Bernard Généreux, 1 minute, and then Mr. Lefebvre, and then we'll go as quickly as possible. Mr. Généreux, and then Mr. Sanson. I was fourth, says Mr. Sanson. No, it was right. Sorry, Mr. Sanson. It's not you. Mr. Généreux, 1 minute, and then Mr. Lefebvre. Go ahead, Mr. Généreux. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Théberge. We apologize for what happened, for having had to invite you a second time. People were able to comment on what you said at the first meeting. Where we left off on Tuesday was that there are 4 federal organizations: Treasury Board, Canadian Heritage, Public Services and Procurement. The minister who was here earlier has said that it's the whole of government, it's no longer in silos, but the number of complaints in those organizations has increased. How do you expect to be able to direct your recommendations to this new way of governing? At a certain time, it was called interdepartmental. When I worked with community groups, we were told to contact different departments depending on the request. One of the challenges with this type of model, where responsibility for official languages is fragmented, is that the question at a certain point becomes who's responsible for official languages. One of the things we should consider in the future is where should responsibility lie for official languages within government. I'll have to stop you there. Now, Monsieur Lefebvre. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, Mr. Théberge, but you've been able to conclude. So now, Mr. Lefebvre. I think one of my colleagues will keep going with that. Mr. Théberge, thank you again for being here. Your experience is in minority contexts. Manitoba, Ontario, New Brunswick, of course. So it's clear that you have the background and the education to defend official languages. As Mr. Généreux mentioned, given that we have a second session here today, you may know that this committee recommended to the House of Commons that Supreme Court justices be fully bilingual. You made a comment on Tuesday. You referred to the fact, and I'll paraphrase what you said, that would be desirable to reach that goal. In practice, it's difficult to do so. And I've found that striking because you're the nominee for the position of Commissioner of Official Languages, the head honcho, the defender of official languages. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to elaborate on your comments, to better explain yourself, because I find it a bit concerning. Thank you. In fact, when I thought about what I said, the way I said it, there were 2 parts to it. The first was good, the second wasn't as good. The first part I said, of course, the principle of bilingualism at the Supreme Court is essential. Bilingualism at the Supreme Court is not only essential, it's undeniable. It's part of linguistic duality. The Supreme Court must be able to respect that duality. If we look at what happens in selecting Supreme Court justices, there are conventions, there are practices. There's a practice to have regional representation. There's an alternating system between where the Supreme Court Chief Justice comes from, civil law or common law. And there's also practices for language. What I wanted to do, but I expressed myself poorly. There are pressures now for the selection process. If we look at the most recent process, people were saying maybe it's time to have an Indigenous judge. And what came up? Bilingualism. I think the point we're at is that we need to go beyond convention. If we want to ensure in the future that Supreme Court justices are bilingual, it would need to be codified. There would need to be a law. I know that the NDP put forward a bill. Is it the right one? I don't know. But what I do know is that if we want to enshrine Supreme Court bilingualism in Canada in a changing society, we need to have a stronger mechanism than practice. Thank you, Mr. Theberge. But at the same time, the new leader of the NDP disavowed that practice. So it's a little bizarre that they've said that. Given your background and the fact that you would serve for 7 years until 2025, what would be the legacy you'd like to set out? In 2025, let's say you've finished in your role, what would you like to say you've done to leave a mark? I think what we need to focus on in the coming years is modernizing the Official Languages Act, especially Part 7. There's already work being done for Part 4 for service delivery. But where we have an extraordinary opportunity is with Part 7. When we talk about the development of official languages communities, it's in Part 7, but there aren't any rules. What's a positive measure? If we look at the literature, Michel Doucette, or Mr. Labelle, or Mr. Fourchet, there's no definition within Part 7 of vitality, of development, of positive measures. So we need to work on that Part 7. And the next action plan, the plan that will be presented is more or less already developed, but the next plan, if we give a lot more meaning to Part 7, the next action plan should redefine the relationship between the government and communities. I think over the next 7 years, we need to find a way to slow down the historic erosion of French language communities outside Quebec and English-speaking communities in Quebec. We need to do that with a law where we set out what the obligations are. That's the first thing. Second, language of work at the federal government. There's a report that came out recently, very recently, and once again, we see that it's very difficult to work in French in the public service. How is it that 50 years later, we're still facing the same challenges? The study was done. There are recommendations. The commissioner met with the public service to see how things can be done, and 5 things were identified for leadership, culture, training. Mr. Theberge. So we need to modernize the Official Languages Act. The action plan needs to be connected to the needs of communities, and we must ensure that everyone can work in the language of their choice within the public service of Canada. That concludes your time, Mr. Lefebvre. Ms. Kuzi, please. I believe you're sharing your time with Mr. Généreux, so go ahead. So how much time do I have? Well, as you wish, for sharing the time. Hello, Mr. Theberge. It's a pleasure to see you today once again.
I'm a big fan of Morton Blackwell of the Leadership Institute, and he has his principles, 25 of them, which conservatives tend to follow. And one of my favorites is personnel is policy. That is to say, the people who you employ will certainly act out your will. So my question is, how do you intend to organize your office, and in particular, your senior personnel? The previous 2 assistant official language commissioners commissioners were both French. Do you intend to include Anglophones in your senior personnel? Of course, historically, political parties have the pattern of when you have a Anglophone leader, you have a Francophone deputy. When you have a Francophone leader, you have an Anglophone deputy. So I'm just curious as to how you will construct your senior personnel in regards to linguistic capabilities.
Well, to answer your question, first, there are a lot of people that are in acting positions currently in the office. So one of the first things to do is to basically get a handle on who's actually working there doing what. And secondly, I'm sure that there are people who will be leaving. And as people leave, I think what we have to do is, and Mr. Fraser was very eloquent on that. He said he worried more about HR than he worried about policy, but he really worried a lot about HR. And I think it's very important in the Commissioner's office to get the right linguistic mix. Okay, as I mentioned before, and to our previous question, it is really important that the Anglophone minority be really not forgotten in how we do things. So I think it's important that we find people who can articulate their vision within the office. So I think we have to look at who's available, who's the best person, and maybe try to have a better balance.
That sounds very reasonable to me. Paul took one of what was my favorite questions, your first issue to focus on, so I'll go to another question that I thought was very interesting that I would like to pose to you. The Commissioner of Official Languages has more than one role: ombudsman, auditor, promoter, watchdog, educator, intervener before the courts, rapporteur, etc. Which do you believe the most is important? And I say that because I've only been on this committee for maybe 6 months, and it seems we've very much sort of focused on the watchdog, but when I hear some of the statistics as quoted by the Minister of Heritage today, I wonder if we should be working more on promotion. So which aspect, which role is the most important to you, and why?
Well, I think there are two roles that are key of the seven that you mentioned. One is I will call the audit function, the compliance function. Extremely important to make sure that that if we get complaints, we act on them, we investigate. We have to ensure that the act is respected and implemented. But the other piece is the policy research communication piece, which is very, very important, because even today the concept of duality is misunderstood. We have to convince people that it's a fundamental part of Canada. And research always should drive policy. I'm not saying always does. Evidence should drive policy. I think as we try to work towards modernizing the Official Language Act, working with the committees and the parliamentarians, that we need good research. And and research also gives you the kinds of message you need to speak to people. So it's a sort of a yin and yang thing. You have to have compliance. You have to have compliance. But then you have to also be able to promote and to educate and to research.
I appreciate that response, and I also think that we, as Canadians, we need to look at a realistic definition of duality. So thank you very much for that. Et maintenant, je vais laisser la parole.
And now,
40 secondes.
give the floor to Mr. Genereux. 40 seconds. I'm lucky of 40 seconds. Mr. Théberge, I'll have another turn to ask you questions later, but I'd like to go back to a question we spoke about on Tuesday regarding the means that the Parliament can give you so you can, so that the organizations, whether they're private or public, can enforce the law. In your opinion, it would be essential for them to have tools. I want you to prepare your answer. You won't be able to answer later because now you're out of time, so. Mr. Mulcair, 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to go back to one aspect of your answer earlier when you talked about practices and conventions. There are 3 judges in Quebec, and it's actually enshrined in law. It's not just a practice or a convention. We all remember that the Supreme Court said it was quasi-constitutional. So I just want to summarize in one sentence what I've understood from you. You're telling us that, in your opinion, we have to find a way to clearly state under the law that you should be bilingual you must be bilingual to be appointed to the Supreme Court. Perfect? Great. Next, I want to ask you, since we're talking about you and your experience, I know you have a lot. Can you give us an example throughout your career where you had to stand up tall and faced a government or a minister in a very public fashion and explain what you're doing? I'm concerned, but I see how the deputy ministers obviously make life easy for the ministers, but your job will be to stand up to them. So give us an example of a choice you've made and how you had to stand up on a public file. From 1983 to 85, I was Director General of the Franco-Manitoban Francophone Association. I remember very well because I was responsible for translating laws in Manitoba at the time. So I was General Director, and we had to stand up to the government, and it was against the Francophone minority. There was a plebiscite, public hearings against Francophones, even death threats. And there was even a fire at one of our offices. So I really showed at that time I was able to stand up to the government. I know that, but I wanted to hear you say it. Yes, I understand. I remember that time because I was there when there was that Supreme Court decision, and I experienced it firsthand because I was in charge of preparing the French version of the law. But the appointment process is very important, and I don't want you to hear anything else. Just like the law requires 3 judges from Quebec, it also requires consultation. So I wanted to make you know that we weren't aware that we were not consulted, and it's a problem for us. Now we go to Mr. Genereux. I'm not doing such a bad job. So I go back to my question, Mr. Théberge, regarding the tools that should be given by the government to the Official Languages Commissioner to enforce the law. You could perhaps impose penalties, sue people. This also could potentially include organizations that have been privatized, such as Air Canada, or departments that also have to apply the law. There are several examples. In your opinion, if I'm not incorrect, you said on Tuesday that the commissioner needs tools. Mr. Graham has complained several times there's no grievance process or any way that they could obtain justice or to apply the law as it was written. In your opinion, once again, we've often mentioned the example of Air Canada. Will you be able to give fines or apply sanctions to a company that is under the law? The chairman of Air Canada appeared before a committee last year. It was very publicized, and there was even a continuous improvement process that was in place. But in spite of this, do you think that the commissioner should have these tools or means? The short answer is yes. Because if you go back to Mr. Fraser, he's often mentioned that we can do investigations and we can make decisions. But what are the consequences? As I said during my first appearance here on Tuesday, a law without teeth, what is it? So we want a commissioner who has teeth, so we need an act or legislation that has teeth. So what would you suggest? What tools would you prefer? given the report that we filed. As a committee, you've done a report, and the last recommendation is one that I think we really have to seriously examine with regard to giving the commissioner power for either sanctions or fines. I know it seems old to talk about linguistic police, but it's as important, as I often say, that there should be consequences. We have to have the means and the tools to do so. In the amended law, because we're going to conduct a study to amend the Official Languages Act, which has not been amended for quite some time, I think that the committee wants to take part in this. So within this new act, would you see the implementation of these tools? Do you already have some tools that you've chosen? 3 or 4 potential components that you'd like to see? Do you have any suggestions? I don't have anything particular chosen. I think the 4 elements that have been identified should be examined more closely. What could this mean? We've had several witnesses tell us before we tabled our report that it is inevitable if the commissioner gives fines or sanctions of any sort, the government would have to pay. But our thought is that if departments receive fines, they will have to avoid future fines. They'll have to make sure that they apply the law. So that's one of the principles that we studied, even though the government's just taking money from one pocket and putting it into another. In terms of the Commissioner's office, we have to look at these things and to study it closely and look at the impacts and the consequences of the various options. Okay, that's fine. 15 seconds. So we're going to go to 4:15 and then we have a vote. 5:15 rather. So 5 minutes for everyone and then we're done. Inaudible. Daryl, 5 minutes. I'll share my 15 seconds with him. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Theberge. I'm happy to see you again. I have 4 or 5 questions, and I'd like you to give rather quick answers. Just to clarify, you said that we have to make sure that there's a method that to ensure Supreme Court judges are bilingual. Yes, you think they should be bilingual? Yes. Second, in your mandate, there are 3 categories and roles: equality of both languages at the Parliament, equality of both languages in the Canadian society. But the third point, which is for me the most important, or very important rather, is to support the success of official languages minority communities. So the question of enrichment of these communities, I'd like to know, through your role, not only will you have to follow up on complaints and investigations and reports, but you also have to fulfill your role by conducting investigations on your own initiatives. I know you're not there yet, but do you have any ideas about investigations, about your own initiatives that you have in mind? When you talk about the Official Languages Action Plan and its impact, we have to measure the impact of this action plan. It's also important to know where the money's going. So there has to be accountability. This is very important in the implementation of the action plan. And there were some things that my predecessor started that have to be watched. Immigration, we're setting targets. Are we achieving them? Because immigration is one of the keys to the future of Anglophone and Francophone communities in Quebec. So we say we want to do better, but we always have to be vigilant in terms of these targets. So I'll give you 2 other ones that I believe are very important. The first is very important, and the second one is extremely important. First, the government has property it owns land, and at a certain time it didn't use it, so sometimes they give it away. And I've noticed that governments, I'll take the example of BC, they've sold property that belonged to the federal government to other parties, and Francophones who have been waiting for French schools for 10 years have never been able to obtain land. So Francophone communities in these minority communities should have access to these lands. Second, there are agreements between federal governments and the province. So these agreements, we always say it's provincial jurisdiction. But the Charter says in 16.3 that it does not limit the power of Parliament to favor the progression of equality. So that's my second point. So then I'll ask you for quick answers because I have 3.5 minutes. That's 45 seconds. How many minutes? Can you comment on the following point? Thank you. Equal does not necessarily mean fair. Even though, in principle, equality is not equity. If there's a minority group, for them to be the same as another group, yes, there's a question of fairness. We have to take positive action. For example, job fairness. For some groups, we have to implement special measures to make sure that they will possibly be able to be treated equally. Yes, thank you. My last question, since we don't have very much time, is that there are some people who have said that there are rumors that the person who could be nominated, perhaps you didn't have as much teeth as they would have liked. Do you have teeth? Teeth are strategic. You have to use them in the right manner. As I said already, if you're always being aggressive every day, no one listens to you. You have to be strategic. As president of the university, when we worked with the government, we negotiated. And that situation, I was able to go back to my experience as an activist, so I'll go back to that. Thank you very much. Mr. Mulcair, I wanted to go back to the point I was making with Mr. Tiberge earlier. I wanted him to understand that on our side, since we are one of the recognized parties at the House of Commons with 44 members, and 12, the government decided that to proceed in a certain manner, and the law requires consultation. As my colleague said, in the response to Prime Minister, when there's consultation, they ask your opinion or your advice. You tell them what your choices are, what your rationale of the choice is, etc. So that's in the jurisdiction. For us, it's clear. A government that says it's consulted by saying, here's the person we've selected, that's not consultation. They're informing you. So I just wanted to say that on our side, that's the position we're going to maintain. And I think that the work that the official languages commissioner has to do is too important for it to be spoiled by the vices in the nomination process. And the minister's lack of response confirmed our position on that. In the present case, I was able to write a very similar letter, and the minister said, you asked us to consult Francophones outside of Quebec and English-speaking Quebecers, and obviously we wanted to have someone from Acadia, but they forgot one thing, which was at the very top of my letter, and that was that she never consulted the NDP. And it said it very clearly in the letter. It spelled it out. So I just wanted to say that. It's part of our work as parliamentarians to make sure that the law is enforced. We live in a state of law, and so for us, this is essential. But I want to go back to the question of current provisions in the OLA. I know that Mr. Théberge knows them very well. Aside from the question of knowing where the recommendations are going to be focused on, Air Canada, it's at the bottom of the list of companies that respect the OLA. The Official Languages Commissioner, what tools should they have to change companies like Air Canada that refuse to respect the Official Languages Act? When you look at the conclusions of this committee with respect to Air Canada, you realize that we're at a point, well, there aren't many measures left to take. Now we have to talk about fines and sanctions. Air Canada, in its defense, they want to subscribe to the law and they want to involve Transport Canada. We have to have consequences, and for a private company, it's often a question of money. I know that Air Canada has big budgets, but I'm not sure what we could do to make sure that they're going to enforce the law. But right now, we don't have this means. I just wanted to tell you a short anecdote that I've experienced. There was an announcement from a person who sat 2 seats in front of me, and she did the announcements in French, and the person answered her in English, and she didn't speak English. And they said, I'm bilingual, and we're asked not to speak in French. Do you think this is something that an Official Languages Commissioner could look at? Yes, absolutely. Thank you. 30 seconds. Next, you have 5 minutes, 30 seconds. I'm the last one. Yes. 5 minutes, 15 seconds. Thank you very much. Mr. Théberge, I know that there were questions about the process, and that doesn't really concern you, the nomination process. I understand, but we've seen you for 2 hours now. We started on Tuesday, and we're ending this now. But I'd like to tell you that even though I'm from Acadia, and I graduate from a University of Moncton, I never got a chance to meet you because you came to the university after me. But I'm quite pleasantly surprised you left Manitoba and you went to McGill. So you understand the concerns of the Anglophone minority in Quebec. And this multiplies the strengths and the challenges that Canadians have. And I'm very impressed by your background. I have nothing but good things to say.
I'd like to take this opportunity, Mr. Vice Chair, if you'll allow me, I'd like to table a motion that we can distribute. We were supposed to do it on Tuesday, but there were technical problems. I'd like to move the nomination of Mr. Théberge as Commissioner of Official Languages. And the motion is as follows. Mr. Vice Chair, that the committee report to the House on what follows. Your committee has considered the certificate of nomination of Raymond Théberge, the nominee for the position of Commissioner of Official Languages Canada, referred on Thursday, November 30th, 2017, pursuant to Standing Order 111.1 sub 1. Your committee has considered the proposed appointment of Raymond Théberge as Commissioner of Official Languages of Canada and reports its recommendation that he be confirmed by the House of Commons as Canada's Commissioner of Official Languages. So yes, that's in order. There's been notice of 48 hours, so everything is in order. We can have a discussion if anyone would like to say something. It's the time to talk. If anyone would like to oppose it, or if anybody would like to highlight their support, they can go ahead. Ms. Lapointe. Mr. Chair, I'd like to say that I'll be here tomorrow. I'll be available to table the recommendation in the House for the Commissioner of Official Languages. That's very kind of you, Ms. Lapointe. Would anyone like to speak to this? I think we'll be voting on this, Clerk? Yes. Yes, in front of the candidate. Mr. Sanson. I'd just like to say that, Mr. Theberge, I've always been impressed by your work, by your background, by your 2 appearances here. They've confirmed that you will represent Francophones outside Quebec and Anglophones within Quebec very well. Would anyone else like to say something? I would just like to say this, Mr. Theberge. Thank you for having appeared before the committee. Good luck to you for what will happen after this vote. And I would like to say, regarding bilingualism at the Supreme Court and the coercive power of this that this committee would like you to have, remember that it's not your duty to look at practices. That's our duty. But if ever you have those powers, use them. So now, time for the vote. I won't be voting myself. So who is for recommending the nomination of Mr. Theberge to the House of Commons? Raise your hand. Very well. Would you like to see who's against? Yes, of course. Who is against? Very well. The vote having been held, we can now proceed to the rest. Ms. Lapointe, you will be bringing this report to the House of Commons. So I think we should suspend. We'll come back in a few minutes to talk about next week. Mr. Theberge, thank you. Have a good evening.